Yes, monkey versus robot. AKA a designer's plight in Silicon Valley. It could actually be really challenging to be a creative, to be a designer amongst an engineering culture. And that's kind of what I wanted to share with you guys today. A little bit of my experience working in big tech companies like Stuart mentioned. I worked at Facebook. Correction, I'm no longer at Pinterest. This is my first week of fun employment, so yeah. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today about this theme of robot, or as I like to spin it, with monkey versus robot. Up until 10 years ago, these were really the only robots that I gave a shit about. To be honest with you, I think C-3PO was responsible for my love-hate relationship with technology, kind of because he's such an annoying character, but he's so lovable. It's hard to hate this guy. But really, I think when I look back at my training, I went to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, and I was trained like as a more traditional graphic designer, communication designer. I did a lot of printmaking. I studied fine arts pretty heavily. I did a lot of painting, specifically letterpress. I worked with some of you guys, Katie, out in the print shop down there. And I adamantly wanted to not be an interactive designer. I didn't want to work in technology. I didn't want anything to do with the internet, because at the time it sucked, especially for someone that was so into typography. I never would have thought that I'd be working for big tech companies like Facebook or Pinterest again, but here I am today talking to all you guys in this fantastic office. So I'm someone who kind of built his practice, his professional career, making things physically with his hands, often analog objects. Here I am with my co-conspirator, Ben Berry. His little brother's here if you want to give him shit. Wyatt's up there. Yeah, so him and I founded this thing called the Facebook Analog Research Laboratory. Essentially, it was this print shop inside of a big tech company. So, like, why the fuck would a tech company have this print shop? To be honest with you, it's because we were bored. It was two lonely communication designers in a sea of engineers, and we really just wanted to get our hands dirty and keep those skills sharp. So we bought a couple supplies, we squatted in the back of this warehouse, and we started printing things. There's my letterpress that I restored just to prove how analog I was. This thing didn't even run on electricity. You had to like hand crank it to mix the ink. And so it was a pretty awesome press, but yeah, this thing was as analog as it could get. We printed lots of things. I did tons of linoleum cuts. Here I am kind of cutting type for our infamous mantra, which was hack. We would print all of this paper ephemera and we would give it out to engineers and people, trying to get them to think a little bit differently about what we were doing as a company, and just to humanize some of the aspects of the business. I would also paint and inscribe these kind of cultural mantras on artifacts, things that were in the ether, things that people were saying in the company, and I would try and give it some form and some context and get people to think differently about what they were doing. Again, getting engineers to think more human about what they were doing. We're just in such a digital world, and we were looking at people as data, and what the Analog Research Lab really tried to do was to humanize both what we were doing in the company and what the end user, the people that were using the product. So I knew it was something pretty fantastic that we had built, even after I had gone a couple years after. Actually, a few months ago, I was scanning my news feed, and I saw this picture of the Analog Research Lab, and it just blew my mind. It really touched me. Miley motherfucking Cyrus in the Analog Research Lab, just kind of laying on my print table. It's a pretty fantastic moment. I think actually that's like the peak of my career. So it was pretty awesome. I got to do some of this stuff. After leaving Facebook, I went to Pinterest, and I got to bring some of these practices with me. And this is actually a workshop, a creative series that we designed with Alexandra Bond, who's a designer there. We call it Printerest, because we love puns over there at Pinterest. And really, we would just bring in some of our friends and host these community creative workshops. Here we have Jessica Hish. She would do some illustrations and teach a screen printing course. Eric Marinovich came in and did these brush lettering workshops, which really were an excuse for us to just get drunk and draw letter forms together, which is the sole reason why we're designers. But it was fantastic, right? I got to do all these analog things. So some of you guys might think that I have an adversarial relationship to technology. And sometimes I do, to be honest with you. When I take a step back and I look at the work that's happening in the industry today, technology actually can enable designers to do a ton of cool shit. It can help us do things faster and cheaper. But the adverse side of that is, to be honest, sometimes designers are lazy, right? You see this kind of cut and paste practice, or you see pick a font and that's your logo type of shit, which is just like not particularly interesting to me. But I'm no stranger to working and collaborating with engineers and technology. Just an example of something, again, that we did at Facebook. I'd kind of be a fool to not capitalize on this access that I had to these world-class engineers. And I did a lot of collaborating on top of the Facebook platform, a lot of hacking and building and prototyping. So this experience, what we did is we took these NFC tokens and we associated them with your Facebook profile. As you walked around the F8 Developers Conference, you could swipe at these little pedestals, essentially robots that were powered by Arduino machines. And it would trigger all of these physical interactions in this space. There's this big 60-foot projection screen that was showing all of these data visualizations as people would swipe throughout the venue. On the far right, you'll see like that was kind of these real-time migration patterns of people throughout the venue. It was doing all of these things like pulling your likes and interests and showing them on the screen. And it also pulled things like your Spotify playlist and play it in the venue. So it was triggering a lot of really cool things in the space. And it was also publishing things to Facebook. So it was a pretty awesome kind of holistic digital experience. So again, for me, collaboration is super important. Working with people outside of your discipline in order to create something really interesting or something new. But when it comes to my personal work, I like to take a step back and do something a little bit simpler, and often just work in my garage on something that I can create physically with my own two hands. So given that the theme is robot, I thought we should take a step back and look at the origins of where this concept actually came from. It was a term that was coined in the 1920s by this Czechoslovakian playwright, this guy Karl Čapek, right? Čapek, I can't say it, sorry. So he wrote this story called Rossum's Universal Robots. And it's a pretty fantastic play if any of you guys ever get to read it or see a production of it. And this fantastic cover from the 20s. But if you look at the root of the word, the etymology, it actually comes from a Czech word which means slave or forced labor, compulsory service, or drudgery. Now, it's really an interesting choice for a word. If you think about it, it was a word that was coined by an author or by a playwright, by a creative individual, specifically because it had these dystopian connotations. It was meant to be illustrative of what this author's vision of what humans and technology would be in the future. If it was to be maybe named by a scientist or an engineer, it would probably be something a little bit more pragmatic, maybe something a little bit more literal to what these machines actually did. But it was a writer who thought that this thing actually painted a picture of what robots and people might be in the future. Here's a scene from one of the productions of it. So you can see, long story short, in the play, humans create robots to do all of the mundane shit that they don't want to do, all of the menial tasks, right? They can do everything because they're built in this kind of humanoid likeness. But eventually, robots get smart enough, they start to group together, and they start to kill everyone. So it's pretty amazing. It's probably going to happen pretty soon. But so these robots kill everyone except this one dude. And then they realize, like, holy shit, we've killed everyone. Who's going to fix the robots when they're broken? Who's going to make the next generation of robots? And essentially, they've kind of they've guaranteed their demise. So it's kind of a sad dystopian story. But that kind of illustrates a little bit about like how people were thinking about technology even in the 20s. And today is probably not that much different. You can see articles about people writing how technology is going to kind of take over the world. I'm going to talk a little bit about this spectrum, the spectrum of monkeys to robots, or people and technology, and how I kind of modulate in between this thing. And I'll just show you a couple examples of people that you guys probably already know, but these are people that are particularly inspiring for me, and a couple of things that I take away from their practices and try and incorporate into mine. So first, there's this dude, Jiro Ono. Have any of you guys seen Jiro Dreams of Sushi? It's a fucking fantastic documentary. Even if you don't like sushi or you don't like Japan, it's a pretty amazing documentary about someone that's just so devoted and fixated on their craft, right? Like this guy is in his 80s, right? He owns a sushi joint in like a tiny little, not tiny, it's actually like in the back of this little subway station. And this guy just day in, day out makes sushi every day, and he's devoted to mastering this craft. This is his son, Yoshikazu. This dude's in his 50s and he's still an apprentice. Like, if that was my dad, I'd be like, what the fuck, Dad? I've just been working so hard at this shit. But his dad is in his 80s, and this guy is still, he does not even consider himself a master. He is still just working and fixated on doing the thing that he's super passionate about. I'll play a little clip from this thing, and then I'll tell you what he's saying.
で、自分たちでも例えばお寿司を作ってやってる。だけどまだあるんだろう、まだあるんだろうって上を見るわけでしょ。ということはまだ上に何かがあるっていうこと。そこまで頂上まで行けば完璧かもわかんないけど、じゃあこの頂上はどこかっていうとわかんないわけですよ。
He says, all I want to do is make better sushi. I do the same thing over and over, improving bit by bit. There's always a yearning to achieve more. I'll continue to climb, trying to reach the top, but no one knows where the top is. It's so beautiful and poetic, and he's making sushi, right? It's pretty phenomenal. Each time he cuts the fish, each time he prepares a roll, his explicit goal is making that roll slightly better than the last, which is slightly better than the last. And it's not about repetition, right? Like, we can get robots to do that stuff. We can get robots to do things more precise and faster and cheaper. But for him, it's about this human process. It's about his devotion to this craft. It's about iteration. It's about adaptation, and it's about his intuition. Getting real-time feedback from someone that's eating his food, and then him turning around and taking that, incorporating it immediately into his process. So for me, it's pretty interesting. So this graph shows when you're learning a skill, essentially it can be measured as your ROI, your return on investment. It's kind of a way for people to gauge diminishing returns on something, right? So from 0 to point A, essentially, that's when people experience the most amount of growth, right? It's when they kind of develop like a basic competency of something, whatever skill or whatever thing they're learning. And most people are cool with that. They get to point A and they just check out and they're like, I did it, I'm cool, I'm gonna clock in, clock out, whatever. And they're just it's kind of average, right? So then point B, there's a group of people that say, you know what, I'm going to invest more time and more energy, and they get ahead above everyone else. And those people put a lot of work into it, and they could actually be considered professionals. You could call them masters, whatever, but those guys actually kind of deserve it. They did a lot of stuff. And then there are motherfuckers like Jiro who just like sleep. They don't sleep. He just makes sushi all day long, and he's like a freaking master at this. Maybe people like, I don't know, Michael Jordan, someone like Frank Gehry who's in his 80s. He goes to the office every day. Those people are just completely devoted to their craft, and they don't care about anything else. And that's why they just get to that upper echelon of whatever it is that they're doing. So from these people, from someone like Jiro, really it's about devotion, it's about practice and patience. And these are things that I really try to be mindful of when I'm doing my work. So next, the far end of the spectrum is like the most technology-driven stuff. When people are trying to get computers to do people shit, to be creative. Sometimes it's called computational creativity. That's like a mix of artificial intelligence, psychology, philosophy, and the arts. Or this is my favorite example of what humans are capable of. Robots that can transport cats in shark outfits. No, seriously. This is a computer that was designed in the 50s, and it was originally built to perform these complex mathematical equations, right, to do heavy processing. And there was this programmer at the time that said, what if we programmed it to do something a little bit more human, a little bit more whimsical? And this guy's name was Christopher Strachey, and he programmed this machine to write love letters. So he gave it a set of rules based on different salutations and different parts of grammar. I don't know if you guys are aware of this project, but it's pretty fantastic. He wrote an algorithm that essentially kind of gathered all the different permutations of this thing and spit it out based on a human interaction, a human point of interaction with it. And it would spit out weird things like this, sonnet-driven. I'll read this to you. My wife is in the back, so she can tell me if it actually touches her. Dear Jewel, you are my eager ardor, my precious rapture, my sympathetic ambition. My fervent heart sighs for your lust. My devotion yearns for your affectionate wish. Yours affectionately, M.U.C. Anyone feel anything? Did you guys? That guy did. He knows what I'm talking about. So this computer essentially was designed to try and trigger an emotional response in people, right? And this was in the 50s, so it was kind of a little bit novel. It essentially was an art installation. But since then, people have been doing experiments, creating programs and robots to actually try creative writing. There are programs that can analyze like a corpus of narratives, like the whole body of work, and it could start to identify paradigms, archetypes, character studies, all of these things, and it can start to spit out narratives just completely computer generated, which for me is fantastic, yet also frightening if you're like a writer or something like that. Just to know that computers actually can generate fiction is pretty insane. Next thing I want to talk about is I'm a musician. If any of you guys are musicians in here, I came across this project and thought it was pretty fascinating back in the 80s. This guy, David Cope, created this thing called Experiments in Musical Intelligence. And he was a musician. He was also an engineer. And I'll just read from the blurb on his site. He says, I began experiments in musical intelligence in 1981 as a result of a composer's block. My initial idea involved creating a computer program which would have a sense of my overall musical style and the ability to track the ideas of my current work such that at any given point I could request a next note, next measure, next 10 measures, and so on. So this guy who is a creative individual who essentially was supposed to be composing this original work, he had a psychological wall that he could not get past. So what did he do? He wrote a computer program that would do it for him. This computer program kind of knew all of his tendencies, all of his compositional styles, and was able to anticipate his future thinking. And he's essentially extracting himself from the process, taking out his human subjective decision-making and training a computer to think for him, which is kind of fascinating, but again, also frightening. But it's just pretty cool that someone said, I'm going to create this thing, which is also a creative act. And just the fact that there's a human behind this thing, creating technology that's helping him see something that he can't quite yet see is also a legitimate process. Here's an example of a similar program, this computer program that was trained to create original jazz improvisations in the style of Charlie Parker. So if any of you guys study jazz or are fans of Charlie Parker or ever played saxophone in the marching band, like myself, it's really hard to discern, one, that this is not even Charlie Parker playing. If you're a fan, it sounds a lot like him. And two, that it's a synthesized instrument. It's a robot, and it's not playing a pre-composed thing. It's actually like spontaneously improvised based on Charlie Parker's style. It's a computer that's trained to understand his embouchure, his articulation, and his phrasing, and then just do something that's completely original, which is, it's debatable whether it's art or original or not, but it's fantastic that someone could create this technology to produce this stuff. So for this process, it's about inquisition, it's about being inquisitive, it's about experimenting with technology so that we can use it to help see things that we don't quite see yet, and it's about ingenuity. So finally, we have this perfect marriage of monkeys and robots, right? We have humans using technology kind of at their will. This designer is super inspirational to me because she's able to use technology just to make her vision, which is so wild, and she uses it for its precise nature and its ability to create things that normal fashion design can't. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Iris van Herpen. She's a Dutch fashion designer, and she was classically trained in fashion design. But early on, even as a student, she said, fabrics and textiles, traditional garments used to make clothes, are actually pretty limiting for her creative vision. So she turned outside of fashion design. She looked at what technology was doing with fabricating different things. She uses a lot of 3D printing, which her work looks very sculptural, but it's still technically clothing with how it responds to the human form. Again, she experiments with lots of different things like plastics, fluids, and viscous materials, all of these different processes. And then she takes that work. She actually starts from scratch every time. She doesn't use reference material. She just goes right into her concepts. And she takes these experiments that she's made and she factors it into her work and often ties it into these really super high-level concepts like alchemy or escapism. And they create these really wild narratives. She also collaborates with a lot of people. Again, collaboration I think is super important with people outside of your discipline. Here are the costume designs that she did for the German production of Madame Butterfly. And you can see how her work, while it's still very structural, she has to learn how to respond with these dance and acrobatic movements. So it's kind of pushing her into a different realm, pushing the producer of this play to do something different. And it's still kind of holding true to both of their art forms, which for me is pretty amazing. And it's super beautiful to see how these things move. And then from her and from people like her, someone like Frank Gehry also, for me it's about imagination. It's about leveraging technology's precision, and it's about having a clear vision. She uses technology just because she has something so wild in her mind that only the most advanced technology can help her produce that stuff. So just looking back again, there are different ways that we can choose to engage with technology. You can choose not to engage with technology and keep your ideas relatively small and attainable with your own two hands, like the monkey. For me, that's really about just devotion and dedication, practice and patience. You can use technology to create new ideas that we don't even know exist yet, to come up with creative things, and that's about it's about inquiry, experimentation, and ingenuity. And then we could also use technology to help us bring our ideas to life and manifest them through imagination, precision, and vision. So, do I think that robots will take over the world? Probably, I don't know, it's kind of frightening, but until then, I'm just gonna keep making shit, and I hope you guys keep making shit. And if you guys are anything like me, it's super important, I think, like I said, just to step outside of your comfort zone. If you're a designer, maybe learn to code and try and prototype something, or partner with an engineer that you could bounce ideas off of, and that might inform your design practice later. If you're an engineer, shut your computer, go try and build something, and then see how that informs what you're building on your computer. And then you guys just might find out that humans and monkeys and robots actually can coexist peacefully. Thanks, that's it.